Hey all, this is the second part of how to use GraphQL with Ruby on Rails. This part will focus on the front end portion. So in the previous part, if you haven't seen it, it's on my blog here or on my channel, which you're probably watching this on, where we did the back end portion of using GraphQL with Ruby on Rails and leveraging GraphQL specifically to render the type of query and mutations and whatnot we wanted within our app. So GraphQL is a little bit different than the typical Rails RESTful routing kind of model. There's a whole concept of that to know about, probably before even diving into doing something like this on your own. So definitely maybe read up on that on the GraphQL documentation, or I'll just follow along with one of my this video here. It's the initial point of getting into Rails and using it within our app. So the next part, like I said, is going to be the front end portion. We're actually going to leverage a few libraries to make this work. A pretty well-known port of getting GraphQL into a front end portion of an app is from the folks at Apollo. They kind of made this famous GraphQL concept their main stake in the lay of the land. I could be wrong with this. I'm pretty new to the React side, so a lot of this stuff is based on React and Apollo and whatnot. So we're going to leverage those since they're kind of known ways to kind of absorb GraphQL queries and mutations and whatnot and manipulate those on the front end. So like I said, we'll be leveraging React in this, but it's actually a port of React that's called React Apollo. And it's an integration of React to the Apollo client itself. So it's an easier way to kind of get going with that. And then, of course, like I do in most of my videos, I use Tailwind for the CSS. So the actual app we'll end up doing is pretty trivial, but the idea is that it's a single page app and it displays some users based on the query data we pass back. Here we're using kind of a package to get their Gravatar, and if they don't have one, of course, these are fictitious users that I seeded with some Rails data. If they don't have a Gravatar, they won't display. But you can create a new user, which I've added below. If you click through to a user, there'll be some posts. This could be extended completely. Right now, I just display a post title, but our data layer didn't have more than the title at that time. So we only have, well, we did have a body, but I think I just had the title for this specific case, just to kind of save some time. So there's only two layers of this. So there's like users listing, and then the user listing. Within that, you see posts. This is all React powered, so that's kind of neat. And then you can create a user. So I'll do one real quick. That's, I think, going to have a pretty good Gravatar. Actually, it should be Andy Leverance and Andy@justthelever.com. If we create that user, it should pop up. There I am. And then my email, and then I don't have any posts yet because we didn't create anything to kind of make the posts in this tutorial, but I just wanted to show you how quick and easy it can be added based with GraphQL, React, and Rails. So underneath the hood, I'm actually running two servers. One's the front end portion of the app, and one is the back end. So we actually have a Rails server in the background communicating with the front end app in our actual same app project, to kind of talk back and forth using this API approach with Ruby on Rails and then Apollo and React. So this is kind of, I would say, a little advanced. So if it's not making a ton of sense, that's quite all right. Looks like an issue here, but disregard that for now. So I actually have I'll just open this in Visual Studio Code, and I have a front end folder in here that I created with React in mind. So what I want to do is recreate this in this video, and it's going to have all of our components and, React related stuff. We use Create React App for this, but you'll notice it's in an actual Rails app too. So I've actually contained these into one GitHub repo, and I prefer that just so there's one source of truth for code. You might feel like you want to extract that into its own repo, which is totally fine. You can communicate between two different apps that way. They just need to know what ports and URLs to talk through, basically, is the gist. So let's go ahead and kick things off. I am going to reference the original project that I called just GraphQL Fun on the GitHub repo. So on my GitHub itself, you should have access to this. If you don't, I'll link to it. but it's the original version of part 1. And I'm going to start from that part to continue part 2. We'll add like GraphQL fun / frontend on it just to make it clear. So as you can see, it's part 1. So look for a part 2 when you go to see this video finally after I've done recorded it. And then we'll kind of come back and fix things up from there. So I'm going to deal with this little issue real quick and then come right back. Okay, so I'm on my repo here. I'm going to actually clone this down. This is the part 1 version of our just a Ruby on Rails implementation of it. So just the back end is what we're looking at here. And I'm going to clone it down. So we'll say git clone. I'm going to paste in that URI. And I'm going to call this GraphQL fun front end. I already have this folder in there, so I'm going to just say demo. So we clone it into a folder called that. Okay, and then we can cd into that GraphQL fun front end demo. I'm typing it all out because I have that other folder. Okay, so I'm on Ruby 2.6.5. We just need to run bundle at this point, and then a few other actions to go ahead and install this. I already installed this project, so it's going to go fast for me, but you might take a little time. There is a caveat to this. For some reason, when I originally created this, it uses Rails 5.07. Don't know why. 6 should work if it's that way on your end. If you run into issues with that, let me know. I'm just curious why mine shows this. I think I had some sort of different gem activated or something like that when I ran the app initially. But since part 1 used 5, I'm going to go ahead and carry on the torch here to go continue doing 5. Like I said, it should work on 6 if you're using that today. But let me know if not. I'd be curious to know. So we ran bundle install. Now we could do Rails DB setup, I believe. And I think this should go ahead and run Rails DB create and then migrate and then also seed. But let's go ahead and do seed just because I just want to make sure we have data to work with. Okay. And then we could say Rails server to go ahead and run it. And yours might say Rails 6 or something there. That's totally fine. Great. So Rails is running. If we go to the GraphQL interface, we should see this from part 1. This is where we were doing some querying. I believe we could do like a test query of users. And within users, this is GraphQL we're doing. We could get ID, name, email, posts count, and run that query. We should see some data since we seeded it. If you're not familiar with any of this, like I said, go back to part 1 where we did all this setup so we can work with it in the front end on this part. So from here on out, we basically won't use Ruby on Rails, but as just our backend, our data layer. So we're going to be talking to it through an API. There is some setup we need to do to make sure we can talk to it securely. And that's usually done with a gem called RackCores. With that, we can kind of tell what origins to allow access to. So let's go ahead and set that up. I'll give you a visual of how that's going to look. So we're in our app here. I'm going to go ahead and open it in this one in the code. And I'll probably put this in a new window so it's easier to see. Okay, so here's our app. We don't have any React or anything in this, but we do have our GraphQL and everything set up. What we need to do is, likely in your gem file, you're going to have a commented out gem called RackCores. If you don't, go ahead and just add this and then run bundle again. So we'll just run bundle there. Okay, so that installed that gem. Inside your config directory, there should be initializers directory. And inside that might be a cores.rb file. If you don't have that, go ahead and create it. And inside that, we want to uncomment this. And a little background of what this is basically, if you read the comments here, it's cores issues. So it's cross-origin stuff between different apps. You don't want to allow certain things in that shouldn't. And this is kind of a gateway. It's called middleware to protect against that. And the idea is you pass in the specific origins for your app to allow talking to happen, and then any resources you want to allow through that. Since we're doing this locally, you would pass anything. A star means anything. But on your production site, it might be like your actual URL, so webcrunch.com, and then you could say, you can comma separate these and say like staging sites too. So if you do staging, if I can type staging.webcrunch, etc., you know what I mean? So in our case, all we need to worry about right now is the star. So let's leave it there. You might do like an if Rails environment development, something like this, to go ahead and, do that. Otherwise, you could just do it for production and set it and forget it. Up to you. Since this is an initializer, we need to restart our server to take effect. Same thing because we did our bundle install there. That probably would need to be done too. So with that done, we should be able to boot our server. Everything should be fine and not that much different. So with that, we are able to now go ahead and install the concept of a React front end. Rails 6 comes with the possibility with Webpacker to install React that way. I'm going to use create React app and install a completely new React app within the directory instead. And I think that's wise in the sense of you can keep those concerns separated so your front end isn't melded too tightly with your back end. And I think that's the approach a lot of people would take and the benefit of using a new front end framework for something like that. Now let me preface all of this with the fact that I'm no React expert. So if you see some code that you're cringing about, I'm probably doing the same behind the scenes after watching it. So never fear. But what I built on the initial front end is the first attempt at getting something going with React and Apollo and GraphQL. So that's the whole point, is just to get that stuff to talk to each other and understand it a little better. So I have to go ahead and install a global add create React app. If you don't already have this, if you do already have this, you won't need to run this, of course. So I'm going to go ahead and run it. I believe I might already have it, so this might go pretty fast. Yeah. So I have 3.2, as you can see. And then we could go ahead and say create React app, and we'll call it front end. And this is going to live within this same folder. So our same Rails app and then root path. Okay, so with that installed, we get quite a bit of defaults and everything set up for us, which is great. A lot of stuff to installing React, which you don't want to deal with. So this create React app has been pretty sweet. There is one for Vue too, I like. Random aside there. So we could say yarn start at this point and boot this up. It's going to tell you, oh, there's something already running on 3000, and that's actually important. We want that Rails server running as well as this server. So you can just say run another port. So Y in this case, it'll boot up 3001, which is good to go. So here's what a create React app looks like. Nothing fancy, but if you look in the code, we can fire up the actual, we'll go over here. We should have a new folder just called front end added to our stack. A React app, we have this structure going on. A nice way to look at React or a folder structure, in my opinion, is using a package called tree. I don't think I have it installed here. No. So I'm going to install brew install tree. And this is how I like to look at it in the command line once it installs real quick. Okay, so with tree, we have access to this new concept of displaying like a root looking feel of a folder. So what you can pass is this ignore flag, and I'm going to ignore node modules because there's so many damn things in those folders. So we'll just do this, and this is the front end app as it stands after just an initial installation. We're not going to worry about tests in this case. You see there's a test file. That's something you could add later as your app grows. That's not anything I'm going to deal with simply because I'm so green on it. I don't really know how React tests and stuff work. I'm not sure what they even use. So anyway, what I want to do is leverage Tailwind in this too. So we're still not done installing things. We need to actually add Tailwind CSS. And to do that, we need to do it through yarn. So yarn Tailwind, or excuse me, yarn add Tailwind CSS. We'll need a few more things too that are going to be dev dependencies that I'll add. So we can run this on command. And it's going to be post CSS CLI and auto prefixer. So we'll say yarn add post CSS CLI and auto prefixer. And I'm going to pass a big D flag here that basically says this is for development only. We're not going to actually ship this any shape or form once we go to production at some point, which we won't, but if you were to. Okay. So if we go back to our code, we can see in the package JSON that should be a dev dependency now right here, those two, and then we have Tailwind right here, which is good to go. Now with Tailwind, there's a config file, and we need to actually initialize that. So I'll do that next, and we're going to just say yarn Tailwind init full, and the full flag basically says bring over the default side of the configuration file. So if we look in this folder now, we have all that stuff I normally copy from GitHub. If you pass that flag when you initialize it, all the defaults come in, which is pretty handy. Now we still need a way to like address, well, how does Tailwind and the React app understand and get to know each other. Inside our frontend folder, we have a CSS file called index.css. And what I want to do is basically get rid of all this garbage and import Tailwind this way. So we'll say Tailwind base. And this is all stuff from their docs, so you can go refer to Tailwind's docs if you want. And then utilities. So we just basically initialize it that way. Now this needs to go into a post CSS config folder file too. We don't have that yet, so I'll actually create it. Post.css, or excuse me, post CSS config.js. And this is just how you set up Tailwind. So it's not anything to do with React at this point. Exports equals an object. And then plugins. We'll make an array where we require plugins. And the first will be Tailwind. And then within that, you can pass another parentheses and the path to the Tailwind config. So in my case, it's straight up within this same root directory. So we could just say tailwind.config.js. And then here's where we're going to pipe through auto prefixer as that dev dependency we added. Very good. That's essentially it. We can add that final semicolon there. And then per the Tailwind docs, you can actually run this on the command line once you're all set up, ready to go. And what we'll do is go back to our package.json file and modify one of the scripts here to run what we need. So we could say right here, build style will be Tailwind build source index.css, and then the output would be source Tailwind.css, and that's not a 0, it should be an O. So here's the end or in, and here's the out. And we need a comma there. And then on start, we can run yarn build style. So we'll basically refer to the one we just added. And you could do an and sign to do React script start too. So that's pretty neat. You can do tandem there. So based on your folder structure, that might change. I'm not sure where you put certain files, but the idea is when this compiles, Tailwind will build this index.css file, the one we just saw in source right here. We'll build everything we need, compile it down, and create a Tailwind.css file to come out here too. And that's what we're going to import into our React app. So when we go ahead and run yarn start on this, let's see, build style is not found. Let's double check our typing there. No, I can't type. There we go. You see it ran Tailwind build, and it's going to tell me the port is running. I'm still running 2 ports, so I don't need this one running at all, actually. Let's do again from this one. Again, it's going to tell me, hey, you're on 3000. Let's use 3001. Okay, great. So nothing's really changed. The fact that you will see, though, that the Tailwind CSS file now exists and it's compiled out, which is perfect. Now there's a lot of CSS there, and I would invite you to trim down this file so that's way less. But like this is all just for show and tell, so feel free to change that. Now the big difference here is we want to import into our app itself let's see, we have app CSS. I'm going to get rid of that completely. I don't want to scope styles that way. And within index.js is our main concern here. We have index CSS at the moment. We can just import Tailwind instead since it's compiled at that point. And then we'll have React DOM, Tailwind, app. And I'm going to actually put a components directory into my source folder just for some organization. And I'm going to put app inside of that. I'm just doing some house cleaning here. I don't want this test file, so I'm going to delete it. And just do that. Components. And so components will actually hook in this file. Components. Since we moved that one. And save that down. I think we should be pretty close. We can get rid of this logo. And probably this stuff up here. I don't need the React logo. If you refer to the blog post, I'm going to have this outline of like what the actual files are in it. So definitely check that out. If I went too fast there, I apologize. But I think that should do it if I'm not mistaken. Cool. So within our actual app file, I'm going to just clean it up. I don't need any of this stuff. It's going to just render components app.js, can't resolve app CSS. Oh, app is trying to import app CSS. We got rid of that and this, so we don't need that. It'll still render at this point. Logo is not defined because we're trying to source it. Yeah, so here's the trimmed down version of no styles, anything whatsoever. I'm going to leave the containing div. We need one root div. I'll just leave the app portion there. And we're all set. So next we need a way to interact with GraphQL. React can't do it on its own. It needs some sort of querying language to meld React together. And that's where Apollo comes in and why you hear Apollo so much in this world. So what I'm going to do is install React Apollo just like we did Tailwind in this case. So I'm going to actually quit this server so we can just do it all in one place. I'll just say yarn add React Apollo. And we're going to get another dependency too that's going to help with Apollo just to get it set up in like a quicker way than install like 14 packages. So Apollo Boost is like a grouping of packages we'll need, and it'll allow us to kind of just get things rolling faster. And then of course GraphQL we need as well from the node side. So we have it, the Ruby port on the version 1 of this, the part 1 I should say, was all Rails and Ruby, and this one is the front end side using Node. So we're doing kind of dual action there. And we can install them, and then we'll import those once it is installed. And where that's going to happen is in our actual index.js. So there's going to be a lot of imports in here. So what I'll do is under the service worker, we're going to import Apollo provider. And that's going to be React Apollo. And then we'll do similar to client, like 4 here. So Apollo client from Apollo client. And Apollo, or excuse me, create HTTP link. And you'll see what all this is going to do in a second. This is just stuff that Apollo ships with. In memory catch Apollo cache in memory. Okay, so we haven't used any of those yet. We still need to. And the way that's going to work is first we're going to set up the link to build. That's going to be our local host connection to GraphQL on our part 1. So that's running on port 3000 right now. So that's our Rails server. So if we say const link equals create HTTP link, and we pass in an object as a parameter, that's going to be a URI, and it's going to set to localhost 3000. And we actually need HTTP. So on our Rails app, we have GraphQL as the actual execution path for GraphQL. And that's where all the querying and mutation and stuff actually pipes to, since we have that one endpoint. And that's what we need to define here. So it knows where to port all these queries and whatnot through. And then we can make another one called client. That's going to be a new Apollo client. Again, pass in an object. And we'll pass in the link we just created. And really need to turn those suggestion things off. And then cache will be the new in-memory cache we just imported. And we need to do a new up on that one. There we go. And this is all to say in our React app here, instead of just our main app containing layer there, we need to do a provider. So Apollo provider. And we'll pass in our app in between that. And then a client will be a prop within the app. So like if I knew exactly what was going on, I wish I could tell you, but this kind of stuff is new to me. So take it with a grain of salt. But this is what the docs say. This is what I've seen on how to use Apollo and React together with the GraphQL. So here's the starting point. And what we can do now is to kind of start to build the UI up. We don't have anything in the front end at all. It's just a blank slate. So if we run our start from Yarn, we get Tailwind. It's going to tell us a new server. And we'll boot it, and it's going to be a white screen. So coming up, we'll add the user list that I showed you that kind of looks like this. Or I'm going to basically make it look like that. And then we'll go ahead and modify it from there. So let's go ahead and do so. And we're going to start off by creating a users component. So we'll say users.js. Inside it, we're going to import React, of course, from React. Import React DOM, or no, not React DOM. We shouldn't need that in this case since we're just importing it as a component. The first thing we'll do is build we're going to use React hooks. There is two types of using React. I think hooks and then the traditional props rendering. Hooks is what I've seen that looks pretty more readable to me, but it's also kind of confusing. So there are some shared logic going on in this app that I use two different types of React. Hooks is the newer thing. So this is how that works with Apollo. So we're going to say use query, and we'll say from at Apollo, and then React hooks. And we're going to just import all the things for right now. So import shorthand GraphQL from GraphQL tag, and import what will be an import. We're going to create a user avatar component from user avatar, and then import create user, once we want to do a creation part from, we'll come back to these parts. So create user, I'm going to comment them out for now. And now we can set up our query. So first, let's go ahead and do that. So this will be stuff you remember seeing in the first part where we say I'm going to give it like a constant. This is how a query looks at this point, and use backticks with the GQL tag. And it's going to basically build that query just like we saw in the GraphQL interface in the first part. So users, ID, name, email, and then post count. And we have all the data already set up in our Rails app, so you can kind of forget about that. Here we're just going to get that data back based on what's set up. So we can build our React hook at this point by defining a function called users. And in it, we're going to pass in a prop of select user. We'll get to that part in a second. But this is how it works. We have a const, and we're going to destructure loading, error, and data back in, and use query, and then pass in get user. It should be users, excuse me. So I'm going to modify this to users. There we go. And that's the essential query we're building. And then we could say if loading will return just like a mundane loading state. And if we can do another one, if error, return error, and then we could pass in the message in backticks. Actually, this should all be in backticks. And fix that real quick. Error will be error message. All right. And then finally, the meat is we'll come back to this one. Actually, I'll come back to that part, but we want to return actual JSX now. So this is the stuff you've probably seen in other React apps. Remember, class name, you can't type class and make it work since this is all JavaScript. If you're new to React, that's kind of one initial gotcha that I've seen. Items center, this is Tailwind now. PB 16. Let's just get our initial user rendering going. Oops. So within this class, we can map the data, users.map, and then through the mapping, pass in our user through fat arrow function. And then in here, we can actually do what we need. So we'll render div key. We need a key for each rendering. So user.id is a good place to start. And then we could say class name. With Tailwind, we'll set it to 1/3 on the larger screens and then full on the smaller. Padding with 4 all around. Text center and then inline. And then we'll do a on-click event coming up that will actually load the user route. And that's going to end up being the select user prop we're going to pass. So we'll just say select user. Bind. We're going to need to bind what to this and then user, and close that off. Okay, and then we'll just have a containing div there. So this is going to be like the avatar div block. So why don't we go ahead and create the user avatar? That one will be probably the most straightforward, and we can pass in the user object since we're returning it now. So let's go create that component. So I'll just say user avatar.js. Inside there, we're going to have import React from React, import Gravatar from React Gravatar. So now we need to actually go install this with Yarn. So we'll go do that. Okay, so we'll run yarn start again. We should be able to import that now back over here. And we could say const user avatar equals a function that returns the prop of user. And here's the actual return block. So you could write this as return like this, but this is the shorthand, I believe. So you could just say that. And then I'm going to use a React fragment. It's kind of like a placeholder without necessarily needing a div, empty div or something. Inside that, we'll get a Gravatar email and get the user.email since we're passing that user through. And with the Gravatar, you can set a size. So I'll say 200 for now. Class name equals rounded full, text center, inline. And that, I'm going to just close it with this style. Inside that, we can get more details on the user though. So we'll have like a user avatar name and title or whatever, and post count. So we'll say px6, py4. Inside there, we'll have another div, class name of font bold, text XL, margin bottom 2. And then we're going to pass in the user.name. Below that will be a p tag of class name. Tons of classes because Tailwind, you know. Text gray 500. And text small for this one. And we'll just get the email back there. So user.email. And I'm going to just copy this part, and it's going to be post count. And this will be a little bit bigger, so base. Great. So we still need to export user avatar there. So let's say export default user avatar. All right. And then that should give us our users and allow us to loop through. So we can uncomment this bit now, add the user avatar. Awesome. So I think we should be able to render once this boots up some data. We might need to import users into our main app. I think that's the culprit. So we don't have anything going into the main app, which is the entry point. So that makes complete sense. So let's do import users from .users. And we can use that. We have that selected user state. So what I'll do is actually just a traditional React component. So I'll say class app extends React.component. And within that, we'll have a state that's going to be selected user of null initially. And then we can do a method called select user that's going to basically pipe through the user prop. And we'll say this dot select state, whoops, and pass in selected user. And then the user we're passing through. So, and finally, there'll be a return statement here, but we need actual render statement now as well. We won't do the React hooks, sparkleness, or whatever you want to call it. And render should be not that. I can't type this. And then open brackets, close brackets. There we go. Clean this up. Okay, so within our return block, we have our app, and we can actually get rid of that. I'll just do some Tailwind container, MX auto, and then PX4 just to give it some padding on the sides. And then we could get, basically what I'm going to do is do, if it's a certain view, render this. If it's not, render that. So we're going to say this dot state dot selected user. And within this block, we can render either the user component, which we need to make still. I'm going to go ahead and type it though, so you get the sense of what we're doing. User equals this dot state dot selected user. and then selected user or select user equals this dot selected user, else we're going to render the users component we just created. So that will be select user. We'll pass that through equals this dot select user. So that's a mouthful. Hopefully it's sort of clear. The idea is in a single page app, we're not rendering two different views. It's basically all based on state. So in this case, we're going to render our actual users component. I think I have something wrong though. So let's double check. I need to export default users. Okay, and then user is not defined, so we're getting an error. So let's go ahead and create that. So I'll get a component called user. Again, we're going to import React as you would. Quite a few things here actually. So we'll say import React from React. I'm typing this all out. You could get like a template if you want. I'm not a big React guy though, so it's okay. We'll do use query. This is for the Apollo part. Import GQL, just like we did on the users. So from GraphQL tag, import user avatar from user avatar. And import, we will be doing this, but I'm not going to have it done just yet. So posts initially. We'll comment that part out though. Okay, so let's construct the get user query. And this is going to pass in an ID to get the user we're talking about. So const get user equals the same thing. So GQL backticks. And we'll say query. And here's the weird part. We're doing kind of a active record kind of thing. So ID is going to be the variable that we pass through, and we'll pass the type of an ID within the query. And then we can get the user, which is the query type we built, ID, pass that in, and then finally return the post on that user of ID and title. So that's probably confusing as all hell, but it seems to work. So now we can use the React hook port of this called user. Again, we'll pass in user and select user. These are kind of the props, I guess you could say, from the prop side. And then same thing, loading, error, data equals use query, get user. And when you pass in variables, you need to actually extend this use query to include an object, which is going to have a variables method on it, or key value, I guess you could say. And what we can pass in is an object that gets the user ID, since we're passing that through here. So all that's to say, once we actually run this, we'll be able to pass a user in on the app.js as we're doing here, and kind of query for the specific user we need based on their ID. So if loading, we'll do this process again, return if error, return backticks here, error, and then you just get the error.message. All right, and then we'll return our actual block. And again, a React fragment. I think these are handy for the sake of the root component. You need some sort of root element, and you can get away with adding like multiple divs in this case instead of that one parent one, which has always been a weird problem in my opinion. So class name will be flex wrap, margin y at 4. inside that, we're going to have a button that's going to be a back button. And the idea of this is to kind of get back to our users listing instead of on these individual user. So class name equals quite a few here. Background gray 200, hover BG 400, text gray 900, font bold PY2, PX4 in rounded. It's basically building a button here. It's going to say back, and that's it. We do need an on-click event though, so let's add that. Say on-click, and we'll, I think, need to do these brackets. Yeah, we'll say on-click select user dot bind this, and then we'll actually pass in null because we don't want an ID to go through. It'll just kind of bark and go back to the user's area. So then we'll get below, it can render the user's avatar. So this will be like the user's individual page. Flex wrap, item start, margin bottom 4. And we'll do another div, class name equals large. We'll go width of 1/4 on large screens, and then width full on small, and rounded, and text center. There's that. And then we can pass in the user avatar component and the user. One more div within this div that's going to be the post listing. So as you saw in the beginning, the user avatar had a post next to it. So we'll say flex 1, kind of span the full width with full. And inside that, we can render what will be the posts. So we're going to need to create that. So this will probably error out on us because I don't have it actually built. But we could say export default user to export it. And then finally, we'll say just import post. It's going to return an error. User is not defined. Let's double check. We need to import user now into our app. Let's put it before here. Okay, and then expected an assignment, a function called an expression. No one used expressions. Yeah, cannot find module posts. So we'll get to actually seeing something in a minute, but let me go ahead and create that. And this is pretty straightforward. So we'll do another component called posts, import React. And we'll do a hook. So posts, pass in the posts and the user. Return React fragment. Ooh. All right, and then in there we'll have class name. Large will be PL. I'll just do a ton of padding on the left. H1 class name equals font bold, margin bottom 4, and we'll just say post from user.name. And then we can map through the posts we're passing through. So map and then posts, we can return a fat arrow and return some stuff. So this will be div key. Typically, if it's like a array of objects or something like that, we need to pass in a key through back. There's better performance gains, I believe. And then within that, class name was P6 shadow, margin bottom 4, and H3 class name equals text to XL, font bold, text gray 800, And then finally post.title. Now we finally need to export default posts. So we're getting error on users, and I think it's because I actually did some on-click events that use some quotations here. So I'm hoping this clears it up. You know what I did wrong? This should be parentheses and not brackets. There we go. So I was getting error on users, and that's what was going on. So now we're doing, I think, the same thing on posts. So I'll go back and fix that. So this should be not brackets, parentheses. I don't like that, but hey, whatever, React, do your thing. So here we go. It looks like Tailwind's not importing 100% the way we want. So let's double check all that setup right. So what I did on the app here, I said select state. I got confused with all the select stuff. It should be set state for one. I'm still getting errors getting Tailwind to work for some reason, but we are getting our UI. So I get the back button and the front button. So now I just need to solve the Tailwind scenario. And I'm wondering why it's not working, because we have index.js here. We're importing Tailwind.css, and it's inside. Tailwind CSS is right here. For whatever reason, all these things aren't compiling down though. So I think I need to double check my package.json file and my post CSS config. Module.exports, because that plugins that require Tailwind CSS, Tailwind, oh wait, no, Tailwind.config, that's right. So let's double check our package.json, tailwind.build, source.index, out is source.tailwind.css. That's right. Start is yarn build style, which is referring to this. You know what it is? I can't spell, guys. Utilities. Probably screaming at me on the other end. One little I made this probably not work. And then let's boot this up again. I bet we'll see our layout. Boom. All right. Cool. So we have some data. We can click through. We see our posts. That's very good. We can't do posts. You can't click through posts yet because I didn't build that functionality in. I invite you to take that further if you want. But let's approach a mutation next. This is the querying side of it. Let's actually create a user now. And what we can do is create a new component just around that. So let's do that. So I'll close this folder. Inside our components, let's do create user component. And in it, we'll have a variety of things, kind of the old school React way, because this shit was confusing me as hell, like super bad. So I'll do what I think is the easiest to explain anyway. So you can import, instead of writing react.component down here, you can import it as a destructured object here and just use component on its own. Some like to do that, some don't. You notice in other components I didn't, but I will for this one just because. So we need the GQL tag. And we need mutation from React Apollo. Okay. So with the mutation, if you recall, we're actually creating something. We're modifying data, and that's the idea with the create user, obviously. So let's call this one a constant of create user equals GQL, and we'll do the backticks thing again. This query is pretty gnarly, so we'll say mutation create user, should be camel case, and then we'll pass in what we need. So the name is a string type. Email, another string, and it's capitalized. So inside that we'll have a block that's the actual create user method we made in part 1. So input, and then the object will pass through. So name is name, email is email, and then inside that we'll have the user And we'll have the ID, name, email, post count. This is what we'll actually render in the view, but if we return any errors, those will pipe through as well. So that's essentially it for the query, or the mutation in this case. So we can create an actual old school stateful component now. So we'll say create user extends component. And we'll have some state here. So we'll create an object that has name, empty, email, and that one will be empty. And then we'll have an onSubmit method that's going to do the actual creation. So we'll call that create user method here. So this will come into more context in a minute, but I'm going to just go ahead and create this method. We're going to pass in the event and the create user portion that we made up. And we'll do event.prevent default. And we'll create a user. And this is that mutation. We can pass in variables in a new object. And we'll have this.state pipe through. So state's going to end up being the name and email, which is what we're actually needing to create the user in the first place. So hopefully that makes sense. And then we could finally say this.setState to nothing, so we can reset the form that we're going to have for the creation of a user. Okay, so that's the actual method we'll call coming up, and then we'll have a render method and a return statement that I always do brackets on. That should be parentheses. Return a mutation, and we'll end at this just so it's easier to see. Mutation equals passing that variable we made that has the whole mutation query. Update will be something we call once that is actually updated. So this .props .onCreateUser. It's kind of a nifty built-in. And inside that we can say create user mutation. Some more parentheses there. This gets crazy, so sorry if it's confusing. It is to me, to be honest, so don't feel alone. Large will be fixed. I'm going to fixate this whole form on the bottom of the page just to get it out of the way, but also still always in view. So left will be 0, width full, background white, border top, border gray, 300. In there we'll have a flex container, or a form, excuse me, and we'll say class name on it will be large px8, so some padding on the top, or left and right, padding top 2, p2. Here's what we'll call that onSubmit method, and we could just we'll pass in the event through to it, this .onSubmit. And inside that, we can pass that event and the create user mutation. So that should handle the actual creation once the form is indeed submitted. And inside there, we'll have our form fields. So let's go ahead and say div class name. Emmet is not a friend right now. Equals large flex wrap, flex between, item center, justify center, large p equals 0, but p on the bottom on smaller screens. This will be kind of just a flex container, so we can make all the fields horizontal. So we'll have a h4 that's going to be class name equals font bold, large PR4, margin bottom 2, we'll say create a new user. And then finally we'll have a div class name of large PR4. This kind of pushes some space between each div and block element here. And that will actually have the input finally. So input, and I'll just do class name equals border rounded with full py2 px3. Class name will have type of text. Value equals this dot state dot name, and placeholder equals name. On change, we'll listen for the change event to update state, so we can pass in the event to do that, and then we can just say this dot set state. Name equals name, or e.target.value, excuse me. Okay, so that's the input for the name. We can honestly dupe this for the email and change just a few things. And email here will be that, and then email and email. Cool. Finally, we need a button, of course, to submit the form. That will go after this div, I believe. Button class name equals bg blue 500 text white px4 py2 rounded, and we'll have a type submit, in there we'll just say create user. And then way down here we have our ending mutation bit, which will come after the form, the div, and right here. So mutation. And we need a semicolon there. I believe that's it. Now we have to export this component. So export default create user. I hope I didn't spell anything wrong. And then we can go back to our users listing. We commented out this before, but I'm going to import it now and go back to that and add that block below this one. So it's going to come after the mapping. So we'll say div class name equals large M4. Just give it some offset, large width 1/4. Width full on smaller screens, rounded, and then shadow large to give it some offset. And in there we can import the create user component and then say on create user, pass in update users. So we need a method to do such. And that's going to be in this component too. So we can come up in here, create a function before the return statement, update users. And it's kind of a gnarly function, but it's going to pass in cache and then object that's going to have the data and then create user. And outside of that, we'll create an opening function, say users equals cache.read query. This is how we're going to actually read the actual GraphQL query that comes back once a user is created, like all at the same time. Query get users and rehydrate the users listing and cache it as well. So write query, and inside that will be an object with the query of get users, and then the data will be users.concat, and we'll pass in an array create user. So again, I don't know how to explain that one, but that's what I found in the Apollo docs. It seems to work. So we'll see. Hopefully that makes some sense. It looks like I'm getting some errors though. So found GraphQL. Oh, I see what I did. I put a $sign here. That's causing conflicts. So definitely don't want to do that. I was referring to the old project and I noticed there was no $sign there, but I see them other places. So that was the culprit. Now we should see our actual UI. Everything's working. We don't see our form yet though. So let's see if I can find out why that's not rendering. On our users, create user, importing create user. So that's interesting. Maybe it's positioned in the wrong spot. It might be. I think I have this in a weird scenario. So this is going to be, I think I'm going to get rid of this. Oops. There we go. Yeah, we didn't need that quarter flexbox stuff going on. So I'm going to save this down. I swear Emmett is going nuts. And then we should be good to go, I think. So if I refresh this, I'll close my dev tools. It's kind of not doing great there though. So let's do relative. I think I put bottom O instead of bottom 0 in that component. That's probably what's up. So let's do, let's go back to that create user. And in that, yeah, that's an O, that's 0. That should shift it to the bottom of the screen. There we go. Okay, so let's try this out. Andy at Just the Lever. I'll do my other email. Should be the name there though. Andy Leverance. And email. This is kind of wonky looking, but hey, it works. Cool. I don't have any posts yet, so let's figure out why. This. I'm going to remove margin bottom from that. And that. And this. And save that. Yeah, now they're aligned. It's cool. So if I add Andy Leverance, Andy at WebCrunch, I think I have another avatar for that one. Awesome. So as you can see, that stuff works. I can click through and see everything there. I don't have any posts because I don't have that set up, but that's something I invite you to extend. This tutorial has gone on for far too long, but hopefully you've learned something. I know there's some stuff that's even pretty fuzzy for me at even trying to teach you this, but I wanted to at least do the old college try in terms of getting Ruby on Rails, talking to GraphQL and React on the front end. So here we're doing all those mutations. As you can see, the Rails server is running on localhost 3000. That was that email I just added here. And then on the front end, we're running React on its local server and Apollo. So all that mixed in with some Tailwind CSS too. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this. I don't know if I'll go deep diving in terms of building a complete app with something like this. I'm sure there's going to be talk of like, well, how do I authenticate and whatnot? There are ways to do it. I would recommend like kind of leveraging maybe Devise and JSON web tokens and whatnot. But that's a whole nother can of worms to open. So this is not an easy approach, but it is one that allows you to separate your front end and your back end and use some pretty cool technology. So, and if you enjoyed my stuff, check out my other videos. Got quite a lot on Ruby on Rails. I have other stuff coming too on Tailwind and JavaScript. And I might do some more on like product design as a whole coming up too. I'm a product designer by day. So that's stuff I just deal with. It's whether it's design related or development or just solving customer feedback issues, help, everything, all that stuff under the sun. So thanks and so long for now. Hello Rails is my new course on Ruby on Rails. I'll teach you Ruby on Rails from the ground up. Visit hellorails.io for more information.